No one saw it coming. When the stock market crashed in October 1929, no one in Milwaukee dreamed that the storm would reach their city. Work was plentiful. Wages were good. "We haven't noticed any drop in business," said industrialist Herman Falk. Even in 1930, the Milwaukee Journal bragged that the local market was immune from peaks and panics. They were wrong, of course. The storm finally broke over Milwaukee in 1931, and its impact was horrifyingly complete. Jobs vanished overnight. By 1933, unemployment topped 40%, and more than half the city's property taxes went unpaid. An eerie calm followed the downpour, a period of economic paralysis that no one alive had ever seen before. Workers who had lost their jobs lost their savings, and then lost their homes. Just as soon as the economy began to move again, there were more dark clouds on the horizon, the clouds of World War II. A second downpour started on December 7, 1941. In the months following Pearl Harbor, Milwaukee became a major center of defense production. Some war workers put in 10-hour days, 7 days a week, for the next 4 years.
That was Milwaukee's weather from 1930 to 1945, a series of storm fronts that kept everyone off balance for 15 long years. The entire nation was blown from a monetary crisis to a military crisis without a moment to breathe in between. By the time the clouds finally lifted, life had changed forever.
The human costs of the Depression years were incalculable. Those 15 years seemed much longer than they were. The human suffering appeared to be endless. Thousands of families who had worked their way up into the middle class sank back into poverty. In Estabrook Park, the newly homeless built a makeshift settlement known as a Hooverville, after President Herbert Hoover. Hungry and discouraged, thousands more turned to the government for help. Milwaukee County's outdoor relief program supplied bulk food, cheap coal, and rent vouchers to the destitute. As the Depression deepened, one meatball casseroles were a staple in many households. Clothes and shoes were worn until they were literally worn out. Furloughed workers often moved in with relatives, and it wasn't unusual for 3 or 4 families to share a single flat. As tax revenue plummeted, local government faced a crisis. Thrifty librarians created books by clipping serialized novels from popular magazines. There was even talk of slaughtering some of the heavy eaters in the Washington Park Zoo. Mayor Dan Hone was not about to see elephant steaks on local soup kitchen menus. "A business may quit," he said. "Your city can't." Hone realigned city government from top to bottom, economizing without eliminating vital services. The results were stellar. Milwaukee won more than a dozen awards in the 1930s as the safest, healthiest city in America. The community was periodically barred from the health contest just to give other cities a chance. Milwaukee chipped away at its debt and even began to set aside money for capital improvements. In 1936, Dan Hone became one of the few American mayors ever to appear on the cover of Time. Daniel Webster Hone, wrote the magazine, remains one of the nation's ablest public servants, and under him, Milwaukee has become perhaps the best-governed city in the U.S. But magazine covers couldn't end the hard times. The Depression was clearly a national emergency that required national action. Enter Franklin D. Roosevelt. Elected in 1932, the new president promptly offered a New Deal to get America moving again. Work relief was the New Deal's centerpiece. Roosevelt launched a barrage of programs to re-employ the unemployed. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, and numerous others. They were known by their initials, the CCC, the WPA, the NYA, FERA, and the CWA. Some critics derided the programs as alphabet soup, but no one could deny they were nourishing. The New Deal put tens of thousands to work on projects that were large-scale, long-term, and largely unskilled. That meant parks more often than not, and Milwaukee was ideally positioned. The county had huge tracts of green space and shelves full of plans for its development. When federal funds became available, Milwaukee put 4,000 men to work on 2 days' notice. The city and county systems were combined under county auspices for greater efficiency, and the workforce soon doubled. Some relief crews developed neighborhood parks on tax-delinquent land that had reverted to the city. Others laid out parkways along the county's watercourses, following Charles Whitnall's master plan to the letter. Tons of dolomite from the county's own quarry were used for bridges and walls on the parkways. Still other crews built regional parks from the ground up. The county's largest green space was, and is, the aptly named Whitnall Park, a square mile of raw land that became a metropolitan showplace. Whitnall Park is still the county's garden spot. Although parks received the greatest attention, the New Deal also funded a number of big-ticket projects, from the essential to the experimental. They included a water purification plant on the lakefront, Park Lawn, a low-income housing project on the northwest side, and, boldest of all, the village of Greendale. The community came to life on 5 square miles of land southwest of Milwaukee. Relief crews turned it into a planned community for working-class families, with curving streets, a picturesque downtown, and ample green space. Completed in 1938, Greendale was similar to Greenbelt towns in Ohio and Maryland. The notion behind all three was the same: surround workers with nature, and they will all become better citizens. Generations later, the original village is still a much-admired example of urban planning. Work relief wasn't just for those who wore blue collars. WPA programs put people to work in the arts, crafts, and even local history. Their efforts had enduring value. In ways both large and small, the work of the 1930s is still with us today.
The New Deal helped the unemployed, but it also changed the lives of the slim majority who kept their jobs. Labor finally won the right to organize and bargain collectively, and unions entered their golden age. After years of wage cuts and layoffs, workers felt powerless. They were quick to form labor unions, and employers were just as quick to resist. The result was an epidemic of strikes.
Milwaukee experienced 107 industrial disputes in 1934 alone, and they involved 27,000 workers in plants ranging from steel foundries to sausage factories. The most serious strike was against the electric company. Pro-labor demonstrators filled the streets, and the dispute ended with a union victory only after one protester had been fatally electrocuted. Other conflicts were more comic than tragic. As strike fever mounted, the students of Dover Street School picketed for shorter days and longer recesses. One sign declared that the school was unfair to students. Teachers urged them to come back to class and learn how to spell. As management and labor worked out their differences, conditions gradually improved. Workers won higher wages, paid vacations, and, at long last, the 8-hour day. The result, when good times returned, was that the working class entered the middle class. There were other bright spots amid the general gloom of the Depression. Prohibition ended in 1933. Local breweries surged back into production, and the spigots ran wide open in Milwaukee's taverns. Baseball entered a golden age. Sandlot games drew as many as 20,000 entertainment-starved fans to the Diamond at Mitchell Park. Those with a little cash to spare could watch the minor league Milwaukee Brewers play at Borchert Field, a North Side landmark shoehorned into a single city block. Home run balls occasionally sailed through the dining room windows across the street. Perhaps the biggest morale booster of the 30s was the Midsummer Festival, a free lakefront celebration that ran from 1933 to 1941. Nearly 1 million people turned out each year for the pageants, concerts, displays, and, of course, beer. Mayor Dan Hone, the Midsummer Festival's guiding spirit, described the lakefront crowds as one large happy family playing together as we work together for the greater glory of the city we all love. Today, in the same location, Summerfest overflows with the same spirit of celebration. Dan Hone himself had less to celebrate as the 1930s wore on. An economic relapse in 1938 wiped out any hopes that the Depression was ending. And a formidable opponent emerged in the 1940 mayoral race, Carl Zeidler. The challenger was an assistant city attorney with no discernible ideology. But Zeidler was a stirring speaker and a gifted singer with energy to spare. He gave Milwaukee its first modern political campaign. Voters picked the challenger in 1940. After 24 years, the Hone era came to an end, and with it passed the high tide of municipal socialism in America. Carl Zeidler acknowledged Hone's accomplishments, but he was looking ahead. At his inauguration, the new mayor declared, "Hats off to the past, coats off to the future." But Zeidler was soon overwhelmed by events beyond the control of any mayor. Nazi Germany had invaded Poland in 1939, barely 6 months before his election, and the clouds of World War II were spreading quickly to America. The storm broke in 1941. With the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States pitched headlong into the conflict. Milwaukee was once again in crisis mode. Thousands of young men and women entered the military without waiting for the draft, including Carl Zeidler himself. The mayor went off to sea in 1942, taking charge of the gunnery crew aboard a merchant vessel. "My life is not my own," he explained. "It belongs to my country." 8 months later, Zeidler's ship went down with all hands in the South Atlantic, the victim of a German U-boat attack. A promising career came to an untimely end. The losses mounted, but Milwaukeeans had little time to grieve. As a major industrial center, the city played a pivotal role in President Roosevelt's arsenal of democracy. When America entered the war, the idleness of the Depression years soon became a distant memory. Faced with a need to double, triple, and quadruple their outputs, local industries put on additions as fast as they could and filled them with new machinery. Most Milwaukee industries concentrated on their standard products. Defense plants around the country relied on Harnisch-Weger cranes, Cutler hammer electrical controls, and Kearney and Trecker machine tools. Harley-Davidson motorcycles provided quick and efficient transport behind the front lines. Carrying construction machinery made new military bases possible. Some old products found new uses. Allen Bradley resistors became prime components in walkie-talkies and radar sets. Briggs & Stratton ignition systems were standard equipment on Allied warplanes. Falk made gear systems for warships and landing craft. Still, other companies applied their standard technologies to military products. Hosiery firms made parachute silk. Pabst introduced a camouflaged beer can. A.O. Smith made 80% of America's bomb casings. The region's biggest defense contractor by far was Alice Chalmers. Nearly 20,000 people worked for the company at flood tide, enough to fill a small city. They turned out an unmatched variety of products, but the company's most important contribution was its work on the atomic bomb. Alice Chalmers produced more nuclear equipment than any company in America.
Part of the Hawley Road plant behind me here was dedicated to work on the bomb that leveled Hiroshima. It was a place of extraordinary secrecy. Military guards were on duty 24 hours a day, and workers were cautioned not to discuss the project with anyone, not their families, not their friends, not even each other.
All of Milwaukee's defense plants faced a chronic shortage of workers. Thousands of rural Wisconsinites poured into the city, and African Americans walked through doors that had been closed for years. In 1943, the Urban League observed, "Today there is hardly a Negro man in Milwaukee who is physically able and willing to work who is not employed." Women were equally indispensable. By the end of 1943, they held more than a quarter of Milwaukee County's industrial jobs. Rosie the Riveter had found her niche. Many women thrived in their new positions. "I can do as much work as any man," said Teresa Langolf, a welder at Chainbelt, "and I can do it just as well or better." For all Milwaukee's war workers, men and women, black and white, the hours were long and vacations non-existent. Everything moved to the rhythm of the war effort. Catholic churches offered midnight masses on Saturday for workers who had to be on the job Sunday morning. The Milwaukee Brewers scheduled early morning games for the convenience of workers coming off the night shift. Borchard Field's ushers dressed in pajamas and passed out cereal and donuts. When Detroit stopped making cars, Americans were forced to either walk or take the trolley. Mass transit ridership in Milwaukee reached an all-time high in 1944, almost 10 times the current level. Gasoline rationing kept drivers close to home, and food rationing limited their diet. Meat was often in especially short supply. Peanut butter and jelly replaced ham and cheese in thousands of lunch pails. No one complained. Patriotism, in fact, remained at a high pitch. Most families invested their newly swollen paychecks in war bonds. Milwaukee's youngsters collected scrap metal and paper for the war effort. Victory gardens sprouted on vacant land in every neighborhood, conserving the nation's food supplies for military use. No one complained, but Milwaukeeans were starved for diversions of any kind. One of the most memorable involved a duck. In April 1945, a mallard laid a clutch of eggs on a piling next to the Wisconsin Avenue Bridge. Gertie the Duck, a reporter named her, and she became an overnight celebrity. Newspapers breathlessly reported every twist in her story, down to its happy ending in the peaceful waters of the Juneau Park Lagoon. Gertie's story inspired a children's book that was widely read in America and translated into Spanish and French. Gertie was a welcome diversion, but nothing short of victory would bring Milwaukee's worries to an end. The long-awaited news finally came on August 14th, 1945. Japan had surrendered. Slowly at first, people headed to the heart of Milwaukee. Long before midnight, downtown was packed with jubilant crowds celebrating the end of their long national ordeal.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Bob Johnson in front of the Riverside Theater in downtown Milwaukee. This is the kind of day you wait 3.5 years for, and after it finally comes, you hope to high heaven you're never going to have to wait for another one like it. What is your name?
Esther Adair.
What do you think of all this celebration?
Oh, I'm so happy. This is the happiest day in 3 years. My husband is over in Guam, and I expect he'll be home sooner than I expected.
When your husband comes back, he'll return to a very lovely wife. Thanks an awful lot. Oh, the crowds have increased. As I look west up Wisconsin Avenue, I see more people than I ever saw before in my life in one single aggregation. Here's a lady standing beside me in a pretty yellow coat. This is WISN, madam. Would you tell us your name?
Mrs. Lasnick.
What do you think of this great celebration?
Well, it's a sight that I've never witnessed in my life. It's so exciting, I really don't know what to say.
Well, it's a rather beautiful sight, isn't it?
It's beautiful, I'll say.
And yet we all hope that we don't have to go through a sight like this for the same reason again.
Hope not. Never again.
As you see all these people milling up and down the street, it's just a mass, a sea of humanity. I never saw so many people happy in my life. What is your name, young lady?
Pat.
Pat, where you... Patsy Lou? Isn't that a pretty name? Do you know what all this noise is for and all these people are shouting about?
Because the war is over.
That's right.
And bring home my daddy.
Oh, swell. Isn't that fine? How long has your daddy been in...
Milwaukeeans knew what they had done. Roughly 70,000 citizens went off to war. Nearly 3 times that many stayed home to keep the defense plants humming. Their work was absolutely crucial. Without the guns and gears, the boots and bombs produced on the home front, Allied soldiers would have had to fight with their bare hands. No less than the troops at the front lines. It was the workers who won the war.
Well, all we can say is it's a happy day here in Milwaukee. It's VJ Day, oh, happy day.
The end of the war meant the end of perhaps the most abnormal 15 years in our nation's history. Between 1930 and 1945, Milwaukee, with the rest of America, moved from the worries of the Depression to the worries of war without a moment's pause in between. By 1945, people were tired of the extremes. Years of privation, years of pressure had left them starved for a life they recognized as normal. They were determined to find it, and the result was an explosion that still echoes today.